Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our learning community. I'm Sally Durstein, and I lead our team here at the Family Business Center. And I'd like to begin by introducing a very important person, a new person that's joining our team, Jen Huntsberger, who you see here on the screen. Jen is joining as our learning community coordinator, and I've waited a long time for her, but good things take time. So Jen's responsibilities are to help me plan for these programs, and she coordinates them from A to Z, and will be communicating with all of you around our programs, around our family business consults, and whatever else makes us fly high and makes you fly high. So Jen has a background in business as well as an educator, and she is also a superb mother of 4 and a Nana to 1 special grandbaby. So Jen?
That's right. I actually am a superb mother to 5. I have 4 boys and a daughter and a granddaughter and a daughter-in-law. So the girls are coming after all these boys. But I'm thankful to be here, and I look forward to meeting everybody, especially at the September 22nd forum that we have coming up, and also continuing to learn how I can serve you well. Our sponsors, we're so thankful for our EDU sponsors. We have a great group of advisors, and I've gotten to meet and work with a few of them already. Greg and I were working together a lot on this webinar, and I've met some of the Fox brothers and Mario, and yeah, I look forward to meeting each of you and working with each of you. So I'm thankful to be here.
So could we bring up the slides? And just a word about our sponsors. We are so appreciative for each of you. We carefully vet our sponsors for their experience, their competencies, their interest and commitment to family businesses. And if you can go on to the next one, this represents all of our sponsors on the slide here. And we'll be hearing from one of them today, from Greg. And just a word about Capstone. They are a sibling partnership, so they have something in common with all of you. So a word about our theme this year. Our theme is building capacity in your 5 mountains. Now, Travis asked a few minutes ago, what are the 5 mountains? So this is our model of helping families really succeed generation after generation. And there's so much complexity in family business because, frankly, family members are in so many roles or mountains. So each of these mountains reflects a team and also a structure. So our work is in helping you to understand and separate and honor and understand the roles and responsibilities of each of your roles as a family member, a shareholder, in management, in the board, and as part of an advisory team. So if you can go to the next slide. So this work is very complex. And our programs focus on the different mountains, but today we're going to focus on the Blue Mountain. We're going to be talking about cyber risks. And actually, it's not just the Blue Mountain, because if we get a cyber attack, it's going to affect all of your teams here, all of the mountains. This is a system, a family business system. So what affects one is going to affect all of them. So sad to say we need to talk about this topic, but we're not going to put our head in the sand, and we are going to talk about it. So before I introduce Greg, just a word, we are recording this program, so you can listen to it at your convenience at any time. And you are also welcome to ask questions at any time. Just click on the Q&A button, and we'll address them either during the program or at the end. So I'm really pleased to introduce Greg Chapels. He is the Vice President of Property and Casualty over at Capstone, and he's got a lot of experience with insurance and risk management. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Greg, who, by the way, also has 3 children, I believe, and we share an interest in history. He's just a really great guy. So Greg, take it away.
Sally, thank you so much. Jen, thank you for your help putting this all together. Capstone and my colleagues here are very excited about the opportunity here to talk about a topic that certainly is prevalent, has been evolving and in complexity over the years, and definitely an area that we're looking to prioritize. So just like some quick bios on today's speakers. As Sally mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Property and Casualty at the Capstone Group. We are insurance brokers, risk managers, and employee benefit advisors. And, we cover all different types of risks and issues for our clients and prospective clients. But this is one where it really does take a team effort, and it's great to have some different perspectives today from some different speakers. I have been in the business just over 10 years. I really found an interest in cybersecurity back in 2019 when I had the opportunity to learn alongside some of the brokers that manage some of the largest programs in the world. Travis, we work very closely with. He is with CRC Group. They are a wholesale insurance broker, and he's a cyber specialist. And I'll let them both introduce themselves, but John is also another partner of ours at PNG Cyber, who is more of a forensic risk specialist and incident response team. So Travis, John, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Sally. Jen, thank you so much for helping set this up. Travis Whitnell, I'm with the CRC Group. CRC is a specialty wholesale insurance brokerage. I focus on cyber liability. In my previous role, I worked for about 6 years at a firm that was a cyber MGA, which is a managing general agent. So think the carrier side, if you will, of the cyber world. And recently, in the last year, moved over to CRC Insurance, where I'm specializing in cyber liability. Currently out of Atlanta, Georgia, which we were talking earlier, and it's very hot down here with not much of a breeze, but excited to be here, and thank you again for having me.
Hi, everyone. John Pomacala with PNG Cyber. Excited to be here as well. I'm in the DC area in Alexandria, Virginia, so we got some nice humidity. I don't know if it can beat Atlanta, but definitely toasty here. Been in this space for over 15 years, a lot on the investigations front. So our team will go in after there's been a breach and really determine from a forensics perspective, like what happened, how did threat actors get in, and what we can do for remediation. But we also do some services on more the proactive side of how can we prevent a breach happening. So it's really kind of both the proactive and the reactive services. But yeah, live in Alexandria with my wife. But I really like this a lot because I grew up in northern Vermont on a family farm. So I'm looking at these 5 mountains. My brother's about to take over my parents' farm in northern Vermont. We got about a 100-acre fruit and vegetable farm. And I go, yeah, they probably need this to help with the transition and the clear roles and responsibilities and boundaries. So I might steal some of this to send to them.
Thanks, Travis and John. So again, we all know why we're here. We've seen the news, and there's been headlines, it seems like every week, and it really picked up a few years ago pretty drastically. And it's interesting, a lot of the news that we see in the headlines are really some large, often publicly traded companies, large financial institutions, governments, insurance companies even. But what we're talking about today is much more the small to medium-sized family businesses that we all work with every day. And what's interesting is that there are some examples in our local area, even Montgomery County or the greater Philadelphia, I'll say, area that have been impacted. Some of these logos and stories and headlines might seem familiar. A Souderton High School right in our backyard. JBS is a publicly, big, large company with a large presence in our area as well. And we've even seen some local counties, Delaware County, and some other nonprofit organizations in the area get hit. And it really is this, while the small family claims don't make the news every day, they are happening every day. And there's a lot of reasons for that, which we're going to talk about, but really they are, small family sized businesses are more vulnerable. They don't have the controls in place, necessarily the planning in place, and even from an insurance standpoint to recover after a loss. So again, some fast facts on what we're seeing out there is, cyber crime, this is a big number, cost US businesses more than almost $7 billion in 2021, which is a drastic increase. And even the majority of businesses, 43%, don't feel financially prepared to face an attack. Half of the ransomware attacks, and this is a big area where we see cyber claims, cyber extortion and ransomware, more than half were businesses less than 100 employees, which really applies to a lot of the folks that we work with. A lot of members of Delaware Valley Family Business Center kind of fit this category. When you are breached, the downtime and the time to get ramped back up to full operational status can be significant, and the average is 22 days. So there's a lot that's involved in getting back up and running that we're going to talk about today. And really what, it's particularly Travis and I, from an insurance standpoint, we've seen drastic increases in pricing of cyber insurance policies. Because the claim severity and frequency has just gone up drastically. Carriers are responding by increasing premiums, increasing retentions, which is deductible or what you would self-insure, and then also being very limited on the kind of coverage that they're getting. So there's a lot of changes happening from an insurance or cyber insurance standpoint. Now, why is all this happening? Some of the reasons are more obvious than others, but the largest thing is just the increase in interconnectivity globally between business. Now, technology has been great because it's made us more efficient. It's made us be able to communicate better, which is all very good things, but it has also exposed a new risk that we are contending with. Cryptocurrency has also been on the value of it has risen up and down over the past few years, and that's a very powerful tool for cyber actors to get compensated. So it's made the whole industry more attractive. There's also been just an increase in the number of and the sophistication of the hackers and the bad actors. There are even things called ransomware as a service, which there's actually kits online and educational videos where you can learn how to breach a company, and it gives you the tools to do it. So it's becoming much more complex and sophisticated. It's also true that cybersecurity is a lot more difficult to conceptualize than property exposures or slips and falls. I mean, we can vision our manufacturing building and kind of understand what would happen if there was a fire or a physical loss, and you can quantify that. Cybersecurity is just such a complex issue that a lot of folks have a hard time figuring out what the actual risk is and quantifying that. And then again, just to reemphasize, there is just a general lack of preparedness and security amongst a lot of folks.
Yeah, and to Greg's point, when you talk about the general lack of security and preparedness, it's gotten a lot better. And I think insurance has kind of helped push that just because in order to qualify for insurance nowadays, you have to have a laundry list of cybersecurity controls in place. And that's back to Greg's point earlier, where you saw the increase in rates are significant on the insurance side. And that really skyrocketed at the start of COVID-19. Everyone's sending their employees home for the remote working activity, and a lot of companies not being properly set up for that remote connectivity to the network, which led to a lot of issues. And so what we're going to do is we're going to touch on a couple examples of claims. The focus here on the initial two is ransomware. So you may be familiar with ransomware, or at least heard the buzzword before. Ransomware is where there's really two types. Okay, we're seeing an emergence in data exfiltration, which is the example I'm going to touch on here. But there's also the more age-old ransomware, if you will, is where hackers shut you down. You can't operate. Therefore, you have to pay a hacker's demand in cryptocurrency in order to get back up and running. But in recent times, over the last 6 months to a year, we've seen where the data exfiltration tactic that hackers are taking is actually more frequent right now than the business interruption, shut your operations down approach. So when you look at this example here, there was a physician group with 13 locations. This was a claim that our team handled, and they had a cyber attack take place. It was a ransomware attack. Now, instead of shutting the operations down, what hackers did is they actually gained access to a lot of the healthcare information that the 13 locations had access to. So the type of information involved in this breach was healthcare images of patients, sensitive information such as social security numbers and health records. And what the hackers threatened to do here was publish all of that information online unless the physicians group paid them a $425,000 initial ransom demand. So anytime there's a ransom demand that takes place, it can vary whether or not claims on the cyber insurer's side recommend paying that ransom demand. In a lot of cases, we do pay ransom demands. But when you look at it here, forensics got involved. They negotiated the demand down from $425,000 and made a decision to move forward and pay that ransom demand at $180,000. Now, why would you make a payment on $180,000? Well, depending on how many records there were, you could be looking at a class action lawsuit in the event that healthcare images of patients' social security numbers were posted online or on the dark web. That could cause a lot of reputational damage for this physicians group. So at the end of the day, working alongside the adjuster, as well as the forensics teams and the insured, it was decided to move forward and make that ransom payment. So the data exfiltration tactic, this could take place with retail where they have access to credit cards. This could take place with professional service organizations that have sensitive information. Healthcare, of course, that's the age-old example, but it's where they steal your information, threaten to publish it online unless you pay them not to do so. The second example talks about business interruption. So a few of the industries that are being targeted the most on the hacking side of things, and especially on the cyber insurance side, areas that are not performing well from a loss perspective are manufacturing, wholesale, and distribution. When you look at those three industry sectors, the biggest exposure they have from a cyber attack perspective is business interruption. Not being able to operate, not being able to distribute the products, manufacture the products, et cetera. So we've seen trends over the last 2 to 3 years, especially during COVID, where hackers were specifically targeting manufacturing, wholesale, and distribution entities. This was an example that we dealt with. It was a $45 million in revenue furniture manufacturer. They experienced a ransomware attack. Now, unlike the other one, they didn't have access to sensitive information, but what they were capable of doing was shutting the operations down of that manufacturing plant. Hackers then demanded $750,000 to release the decryption key back to the insured. Forensics negotiated demand down to $600,000 where they moved forward and made that payment. Again, why on earth would we make a $600,000 payment in cryptocurrency to hackers? Well, when you look at how much income loss the insured was losing every day that they were not operating, it was roughly $80,000 a day. Now, when you look at the span of how long this took, this was about 5 days of downtime where you still moved forward and we made a $600,000 ransom payment. 5 days of downtime at $80,000 a day, roughly, in income loss. The cyber insurance policy provided coverage for up to $400,000 in business interruption coverage, which is coverage for the income you're experiencing, the income loss you're experiencing from not being able to operate. So this loss on a $45 million in revenue furniture manufacturer, had they not had an insurance, would have been around $1.1 to $1.2 million. But since they had a cyber policy in place, they had $1 million limit. $600,000 went towards the extortion demand, which was paid. Roughly $400,000 was covered under the business interruption coverage on the cyber policy. And at the end of the day, the insured was only out of pocket about $100,000 to $150,000 to $200,000. The third example we want to touch on, though, is wire transfer fraud. So we've given you two examples of ransomware and the complexity behind ransomware shutting your operations down or stealing information. But wire transfer fraud happens all too frequently. It doesn't matter if you're a contractor, an online retailer, a janitorial service company. Everybody transfers money in some degree, whether that's ACH payments, wire transfers, etc. This example here took place because the insured did not have multi-factor authentication in place on their emails. So the CEO of a mid-sized trucking company, hackers were able to steal the login credentials to that individual's email. Hackers, posing as the CEO while the CEO is out of town, sent an email to the CFO requesting a $325,000 wire transfer be sent to a third party of theirs that they typically contract business-wise. Well, sure enough, the CFO didn't think about it because this was pretty standard in their everyday procedures, and the CFO wired $325,000 to a fraudulent third-party bank account. Things to be on the lookout, or maybe procedures that you should be considering, is twofold. If you do wire transfers that are of significant sums, ACH payments, whatever it may be, implement an internal procedure where you verify the authenticity of that wire transfer request. Whether that's picking up the phone and verifying the authenticity of the request by calling the individual that's requesting it, or putting a process in place where if you have admin level individuals making wire transfers at your firm, put in a requirement that they verify with 2 senior executive officers of the firm before sending any wire transfers. Any additional method that you can put in place is going to give you a much better chance of avoiding a situation like this, as opposed to allowing them to just let it rip at any given time, because that's when you tend to see the issues take place. Urgency is presented to that individual. They think they need to make that payment, and sure enough, they send money without doing any due diligence to verify that request. Go ahead there. So when you look at cyber insurance, what is it really covering? Well, we've touched on 3 examples now, 2 of which were ransomware, where you're covering the extortion payment. You're covering the business interruption from not being able to operate. In the first example, if hackers did publish all of that sensitive information, you would have to notify affected individuals, potentially provide credit monitoring, identity theft restoration services to all of those affected individuals. What a lot of people don't realize is that cyber insurance is very layered. When you have an incident take place, the first thing that needs to happen is you need to get professionals involved, whether that's forensics groups, data breach attorneys, et cetera. You have to bring in those experts so that way, first, they can determine the scope of the issue, what took place, determine the action plan, and from there, help guide you and make decisions alongside the adjuster to determine what happened, what you're going to need to do moving forward in order to get back up and running. But also, it's the extortion payments, it's the indemnification for sending $200,000 to a fraudulent third-party bank account, the business interruption component, the reputational harm in the sense that you're losing current or future clients because it damaged your reputation on a local basis or national basis. There is a lot of things that go into a competitive cyber policy nowadays, which is why you need to lean on experts in the space or your retail insurance agency, such as Capstone, to help guide you through that process. Greg, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, no, it's well said, Travis. And even going through some of your different claim examples, you can really see that the exposure really does vary by industry. So it really is critical more now than ever it's great to have a policy, of course, but it's really more important to look at the terms and conditions to make sure that it will respond the way you need it to when you have a claim. You know, business interruption being more prevalent in manufacturing, for example, versus more of the network security and liability with more professional services. The other thing that's interesting too is that cybersecurity is unique, and Travis can attest to this, is that, for example, property insurance policies are, while there are different terms and conditions, there's industry standard forms that you can really know what you're going to expect from one carrier to the next. Cyber is really becoming where every carrier has their own coverage policies and forms that can respond differently. So you really have to look at what is and what isn't covered based on what your industry and your business's exposure is.
Couldn't agree more. Every single policy has different language that means the exact same thing. So if you're trying to read it, it may read like Braille to you. You may not be able to decipher the different coverages and nuances to the forms. And to Greg's point, a lot of cyber markets are beginning to really underwrite this more tightly now because of losses over the last few years. So if you're not doing your due diligence on the cyber insurance policy you're purchasing, you may be getting sublimited coverage in certain areas or insurance in certain areas, to where if your agent's not doing a good job of explaining that to you, that could be devastating in the event of a claim taking place.
So speaking of underwriting, and I'll kind of kick this off and let Travis and John jump in. This has become a very important part of our process when placing insurance policies. I mean, even going back 2 or 3 years ago, it was pretty easy, I say easy, to get a cyber insurance policy with the name of your company, the amount of employees you have, and maybe your website. If you send that to an underwriter, you can expect, multiple options with different premiums, different retentions or deductibles, different coverages. Now, the amount of legwork and pre-underwriting that's involved in getting a policy is very intense. And the expectations of what employers have to have in place are night and day from a couple of years ago. So a lot of folks on this call have probably seen an insurance application like this. And speaking of Braille, this is the same kind of language to many of us. So it's become much less of, okay, it's the CFO's responsibility or the internal IT folks' responsibility to complete this. It really has to be a collaborative effort between your insurance agent, between the underwriting community, to really understand, okay, what do we have in place? And what are some of the low-cost things that we could do to make ourselves better protected, focusing on the high-risk, high-exposure areas. Most carriers, there are some things that are almost must-haves anymore, multi-factor authentication being one of them. And I'll pass it over to Travis because he can speak to this. This is what he does every day. But these applications, there's actually been case law as recently as July of 2022, where carriers are now using these applications to deny claims if you're not doing what you say you're going to do on the application. So this example in particular was an electronics manufacturer in Texas that filled out an application. They checked the box that they did have MFA. They had a breach, and it was determined in the investigation that they weren't doing what they said they were doing. So now Travelers is taken into court saying we want no part of this claim. We're not going to be paying any of the defense costs, and we have a problem. So this is when it's ultra important to really take these things seriously and work collaboratively with your IT folks and your broker to make sure that it's completed properly. Travis, anything you want to add there?
Yeah. I think that the biggest takeaway here is it's just gotten much harder to qualify for competitive terms. If you want terms that are not going to offer full limits on crucial coverages on a cyber insurance policy, then you may be able to find that without having these controls in place. But at the same time, any competitive cyber insurer out there that's going to be offering broad, all-encompassing terms wants to see these types of controls in place. And the best way I would say it is if you outsource your IT to a third party and they have to complete the application for you, consider it an audit on their work. That's one way I love to spin this, because if you're paying them $20,000, maybe $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year to manage your IT for you, and you can't qualify for cyber insurance because there's not enough controls in place on the application, well, maybe that's a conversation you should be having with your IT provider as to why we're paying so much money and we're not even able to qualify for $1 million in coverage. So just one way to think about it if you are navigating one of these policies, or applications. Also, getting teammates like Greg involved or myself involved, we're always happy to help kind of walk small to middle market businesses through these applications and hold your hand through that process as well. John?
Yeah, no, this kind of leads into what I wanted to talk about of how can we protect ourselves. And listen, none of this is fun to talk about, so we really appreciate you guys listening in. But the way I think of this so much is like your own personal health as an individual, like a cybersecurity, or can you go back one actually? Like a cybersecurity risk assessment. I think of that as like your yearly physical that you go to see your doctor. How am I doing? Am I healthy? Do I have high blood pressure? Do I need to take heart medication? Whatever it happens to be. That's like the health of your data security. And some of these things Travis was talking about, you're already going to need these things in place to even qualify for a policy. But I think as much as we can do from a proactive perspective to really try to prevent a breach happening, it's going to be better for everybody in the long run. No one wants to have a breach happen, but you definitely need to have the cybersecurity insurance policy. So it is there to help with business interruption, with wire transfer fraud, with ransomware demands, whatever it happens to be. So these are just a few things. And like I said, Travis kind of touched on them, but I think the cybersecurity risk assessment, just knowing where things stand, really helps you make an informed decision. The vulnerability assessment and penetration testing, that's almost like our team or a team in the forensics world, essentially acting as the threat actors of trying to see if they can get through the different holes in your data security. The MFA, the multi-factor authentication, just those things are pretty standard these days. So having that in place and making sure you actually do what you say you're going to do if it's on the policy, like Travis was talking about. There's additional things you can do, the endpoint detection and managed detection and response. It's really just trying to keep an eye on what's going on with all the folks that you have within your organization to see if somehow they've been breached as an individual, like whether it's their email or what have you. The last thing I put here is just like, think before you click. That's, I think, the most important thing. The example with the CEO and the CFO, maybe something was off with it. So just trying to do some like, does this feel a little weird? That feeling in your gut. Let me pick up the phone and call the person on the other line just to verify. They'll appreciate you taking that extra step just to make sure that you're making the payment to the right folks. And I think that's the biggest thing where I come from of trying to think about this. I think cyber as a word and just the cyber vertical, it can be kind of scary. And I know, Sally kind of touched on it initially of the ostrich approach of sticking your head in the sand. It's a way to go about it. It's probably not the best way. So I would lean on the professionals. Reach out to Greg, reach out to Travis, reach out to myself. We're here to help try to make this more, both like from an educational, help you understand so you can make informed decisions, and what's best for you from a risk and reward perspective. I don't know if Greg or Travis, you had anything to add on how to protect ourselves, or I can lean into what happens if we do get breached.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And, we've talked a lot about the risk and the insurance policy itself, which is obviously critical, but that really is your line of last defense. That's your financial backstop. So anything that you can be, more proactive about is just going to help everything else on the back end. Yeah,
for sure. So now the worst part of it, what happens if we do get breached? What do you do? So I think it gets the heart rate up and everyone gets worried. Call the professionals, call there's a cyber breach hotline for whoever you get your insurance policy with for your cybersecurity policy. You can reach out to them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Someone will get back to you right away because they know the urgency of this. And then from that point forward, they'll put together a team. I'd also say reach out to the broker, reach out to Greg, just so he knows what's going on. He can be an advocate for you as you deal with a really bad situation to try to make it as palatable as possible. So once you reach out to the insurance carrier, they're going to put together a team of folks from the legal side, so they can help determine what you need to do from a legal perspective. Like say it's the data exfiltration situation, and there's been social security numbers or maybe protected health information that's been exfiltrated out. There might be different notification clauses that will get triggered. So then you would need to reach out to both, whether it's your patients, maybe it's your customers, maybe it's your employees, that their data has been exfiltrated, and send out notifications. I don't know if folks have ever gotten something in the mail of, hey, your data has been breached and here's free credit monitoring for a year, or here's a free $50 gift card. It's essentially them saying, we're really sorry, please don't sue us and do a class action lawsuit. So just getting a team together from those professionals and really helping kind of hold your hand through that entire process. Because like I said, it's not fun, but I do this day in, day out, and we're just here to help and try to make it easier for folks. So yeah, the scoping call, that's the big where the rubber starts hitting the road as we get the whole team together. And then we're talking to you as, whether it's the IT folks on your side or whoever really determined what something seemed off and identified the breach. We can figure out what happened from that point forward, kind of close the loop. That's like the remediation perspective, to make sure there's nothing else going on, that they're out of the systems, the threat actors. And then whatever else we really need to do from that point forward. We do negotiations on a ransomware perspective. So we really try to get those negotiations as low as possible. but I think, again, I always come back to making an informed decision, get the intelligence of what's going on, and then we can figure out what's the best to do. I listed a few different things that our team typically does of, preserve the evidence, what can we do of, maybe there's something we can do from the system recovery and restoration perspective. Because if you have backups for your data, maybe we can use that and it won't, we don't need to worry about the business interruption because we can get you back up and running your business in a, maybe 24 hours or less if we can get to that data. So yeah, I know I'm kind of going on here a little bit, but there's so many nuances once we're dealing with an incident, but we've seen it a lot. And just having our experience and expertise of dealing with all the different threat actors out there in the different groups, I think it's really helpful. And they treat this like a business is a good way to think about it. These different threat actor groups, it's not just some one guy sitting in his basement plugging away. They'll have teams of folks and they're scouring essentially the world of who's an easy target, these cyber criminals. Yeah, not fun, I know, but reach out to Greg and just get the ball rolling. Don't do the ostrich head in the sand solution is what I would say. Greg or Travis, anything else to add on the incident response aspects?
No, it was well said, John. And I think these two kind of tie together because the more that you can do proactively in advance just makes the incident response so much easier.
For sure.
Most businesses have, disaster recovery plans for, natural disasters or a fire. Anymore, it's become equally critical to have the same type of recovery plan for a cybersecurity breach. And the more proactive work you can do, it just makes the incident response time shortened, less expensive, and less invasive, to your business.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the cyber insurance policy offers the panel providers built into it. So when you have the incident take place, I guarantee not many of you have data breach attorneys on speed dial or forensic teams that have been vetted by professionals that are ready to jump in on and start managing the incident the second it takes place. So again, having the backstop of an insurance policy on top of implementing these controls so you don't have to deal with this at all is just going to proactively expedite the entire claims process for you.
Great. Thanks, John. Thanks, Travis. So I know we did cover a lot today, and this is a lot to digest, but just a couple key takeaways if you take anything away from today. I think we kind of hit home that it is time now more than ever to start prioritizing this risk and, starting to engage with your broker, your outsourced IT provider to really come up with a strategy and understand what your risk is and how you are going to respond. That needs to be done before a breach, not after. I think it's also, it's notable that the frequency of claims that we're seeing are the small to medium family businesses that are getting impacted every day. It's not just the JBSs and the Marriotts. It really is the small businesses because they're more vulnerable. But John mentioned this, how critical a cybersecurity risk assessment is. That's one on your internal controls and procedures and just overall cyber hygiene. But then also really understand that your insurance policy is going to respond the way you need it to after you have a breach. And then I thought this was good too, just embracing cyber hygiene. John mentioned think before you click, using common sense. That really is a great first defense. So Travis, John, anything to add there?
No, I think you covered it, Greg.
Okay. So we do have some time for questions. Obviously, this presentation is recorded and it'll be sent out to everyone on the call. So feel free to reach out for any questions, even if you need a brain to pick. But we can open it up to questions now if there are any.
Yeah, well, you guys have done such a good job of describing everything. I don't see any questions that are submitted now. I'm going to leave a minute here while I talk about a few other things. I do want to thank Greg and Travis and John for your expertise in sharing. And I love the click before you think. And it's good to know that we have you guys on your team and we know how to reach you. So you guys are welcome to print out what you've received here, share with others. And I'd like to invite you to put on your calendars for our next event, September 22. We're going to be hearing from some members and one of our associates on the huge leap to multiple shareholders in an independent board. Now, our membership consists of the small, medium, and the very large family businesses. So as it gets larger, it gets more complex. So we're going to be hearing from Robbie and Karen Kime, talk about their experience. They're G4 shareholders. They're also on the board and working, and family members, and also Matt Sullivan, who's a member of my team. And he sold his business now, but at one point he was the CEO for 20 years. He was accountable to a real board, and he was a shareholder with 19 other family members. So a little bit of complexity there. So register for that. And I do see, let's see, a question has come in.
Yeah, I think I see two questions, Sally. I
Two
can
of
probably
them.
grab the first one. I'll read it for the group. What is
ahead.
the best way to figure out your risks as a business? Can you get an audit done to figure this out? Yeah, definitely. So that's really ties into that cybersecurity risk assessment. So having an organization like ours or whoever it happens to be come in and just try to figure out what you have in place for your controls, and if there's anything else that we would recommend that you do. And even what Travis was saying, like say you have an outsourced IT team, maybe that's the time that you can use it as an audit, because if you can't qualify for a cybersecurity policy, maybe you need to look into why you're paying them 30, 40K a year, and maybe make a change. I know there's another question here.
Yeah,
I'll read it off, but maybe Greg or Travis can handle this one. I know some standard commercial insurance policies now include a limited level of cyber protection. Can you talk to the difference between the built-in coverage and the standalone policies you discussed?
It's a great question. And it really is an important one now more than ever, because what we're talking about today has been, and what Travis and I deal with mostly, are standalone cybersecurity insurance policies. So that means that it's separate from your general liability or your property policy or even your professional liability policy. But there can be some small limits of cyber coverage included in a property policy. And it can be a little deceiving where you can read on your policy, it clearly says cybersecurity risk insurance. But then when you really start to look at the terms and conditions, it's not $1 million limit, for example, it's a $10,000 limit. So, these are just extremely low, we call them sublimits. And it's just not going to respond the way that a true cyber insurance policy would. So while you can have some limited coverage in a property policy, for example, it really is, it's more common to see a separate cybersecurity policy, which is what you really need today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's all based on the limits that they're going to be offering, right? And those endorsed or add-on type of package policies compared to a standalone, you're going to get much broader language, many more insuring sections. So you may get notifications, you may get a little bit of extortion ransomware coverage, a little bit of data recreation coverage. All in all, it's $100,000 in limits that you have access to. Whereas you've seen with the last few examples we touched on, all of those were north of $100,000 losses, which would simply not be near enough coverage if they were working on a BOP or package policy type of cyber add-on.
Right. And you miss those critical coverages that, Travis talked about, like business interruption, for example, rarely would be covered on a package included in your property. Things like reputational harm, that's what you get with a true cyber policy. So, but great question.
I wanted to add one thing. I think I might have missed a part of the first question, the best way to figure out your risks as a business. I think maybe that question is also trying to get at, if we have our business interruption, how bad is that for us as an organization versus if we have, data exfiltrated, how bad is that for us as an organization? And I think, some of the examples we touched on earlier, it's really going to depend. Are you a manufacturing type company? Are you a physician's offices? And it's going to depend on what type of business you are and the risks that are associated with it, and that what the cyber threat actors might try to target. So trying to understand a little bit more of what your business is, then I think folks like Greg can kind of speak to what is going to be your biggest risk depending on what type of business you're in.
Correct. Well said.
Great point.
So to get really practical, if anyone on the call would like to have some kind of an audit, I mean, they understand the threats. Who do they give a call to? Do they reach out to you, Greg?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my contact information's in the call. I'm happy to, provide the general advice. And then we also have other resources too, where if anyone, needs a, outsourced IT company or anything like that, we do have some relationships there as well. So.
Don't be shy, reach out. We're here to help.
Yeah, now's not the time to be shy. Well, here's another question. With cloud-based softwares that are hosting data for our business, what is your recommendation for coverages when most of our data is on cloud-based software?
I can take a stab at that. Justin, when you look at, that's a great question. When you look at the language in the forms, okay, it doesn't really matter where your data is held. And a prime example is this. A lot of times when companies are putting their information in the cloud is generally much more complex and difficult to hack than it would be to hack the entity itself. But there's contract language that's going to be in place between your firm and then the cloud provider. A lot of that contract language puts the liability back onto the entity, meaning your firm, as opposed to the cloud taking on liability if there was some sort of a breach. But the most common example as to how we see claims surface with data being held in the cloud is simply hackers steal your login credentials to the cloud and view your information. If you don't have multi-factor authentication in place, which verifies the authenticity of that login request, shoots you a text or a call, whatever it may be, then it's really no different than your email being exposed if you don't have MFA. If hackers can steal the username and password to log into your cloud, they can view that information. Technically, that is a data breach. It would trigger the policy and our notification process, privacy breach, ensuring sections of these forms would then be triggered, and you would have yourself a privacy breach that is being covered under the cyber form. And you can bet that cloud provider is not going to assume any liability if you were the one responsible for losing your login credentials to log in and access/view that information. Does that make sense? John or Greg, you want to add something there?
No,
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I wanted
Okay.
to add one thing. I think, again, it goes back to what type of business you are and do you store, whether it's customer information, is it employee information in the cloud? So for instance, say going back to the doctor's office example, if you're storing protected health information in the cloud, maybe you want to up the coverage a little bit because of the type of organization you are, number one, but number two, what type of data that you store for your customers or for your employees. So just having a better sense of that, of what data is stored in the cloud. So if something does happen, it'll kind of determine what you'll need from a coverage perspective. But Greg, I might have talked over you. Sorry.
No, it was well said. And, I would echo Travis's comment to how important it is now more than ever to look at those contracts with your cloud providers. Because if you see them, there really is little to no recourse that you're going to have to go back to, your Amazon cloud provider. I've seen I guess the broadest that I've seen was, well, we're going to refund 2 months of your monthly services fees, if after a breach. I mean, there's nothing there that says that they're responsible. So it is an area that you want to look at.
Good information. So we'll leave a few seconds for any other questions. It's very educational.
I think that might be
appreciate the questions.
ready for 45 minutes. No problem.
Well, any closing thoughts from any of our presenters before we end our session? Any closing thoughts?
I would just say, reach out, don't be shy. We're here to help, educate, help you understand the process, how best to protect yourself, both proactively as well if something does happen, making sure you have a good policy in place that's going to protect you on that front as well.
Thank you, John.
No, that's it. And again, just to, thank you again, Sally and Jen, for organizing everything and, giving us this opportunity. We greatly appreciate it. It's always fun.
Well, thank you, Greg and Travis and John and everyone for joining us today. And don't just listen, take some action here for the benefit of all. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.